with the Department of Defense and the challenges that they face, the hurdles that they face. And specifically today, talking about some of the technologies that institutions like the three of you represent here bring to the game, bring to the warfighter to help them do a better job. As I said, we're working on trying to understand the challenges that all those entities face. And equally important to the industrial base is the role of universities, nonprofit research institutions, and development centers in bringing those different scientific discoveries and new ideas to the market or to the Defense Department. The many roundtables we've conducted, with industry, there's a constant refrain has revolved around the problems in bridging the so-called valley of death in transitioning good scientific ideas and prototypes to actual production programs of record. We hope that our witnesses today will be able to shed some additional light on the problem and hopefully make recommendations on how to improve the overall technology transfer and transition process. While the industry is the maker of things, universities and research institutes are the makers of new ideas. And without that cross-flow of ideas, technical expertise, and manufacturing capacity and capital, most of the great innovations in the marketplace today simply would not exist. Business in particularly small businesses are the backbone of this economy, but they rely on a robust pool of new scientific ideas to create new commercial opportunities and keep the nation's economy competitive. Looking at how the process can be better supported is why we're here today. And as I said, welcome our three really terrific witnesses. Dr. Stephen Cross, who's Executive Vice President for Research at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Dr. Norman Winarski. Last week I was just butchering people's name left and right. So, Vice President of SIR Ventures at Stanford Research Institute, and Dr. Stephen Huffman, Vice President, Chief Technological Officer for the MITRE Corporation. That is right, MITRE, right? You still in McLean, Virginia? Yeah. Okay. Well, Bedford's not a bad place. Bedford, Pennsylvania is a little bit better than Bedford, Massachusetts, but it's all good. Well, I'm looking forward to the discussion we have with our distinguished panel. But before I do that, I'd like to first of all introduce those on the panel. I think you've all briefly met Colonel West, who represents Florida, a district in Florida, Congressman John Runyon from New Jersey, and Colleen Hanabusa. I got all the other names right today, so but our ranking member, Mr. Larson, is unable to make it, and Ms. Sutton is, I understand, having some problems getting here because of the weather. So our senior Democrat today is Ms. Hanabusa, but she has really been the star of the panel. She's made every hearing. She's traveled everywhere in the country we've gone. So it's a great pleasure. I yield her for some remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I'd like to say to our testifiers today that this is a topic that's really very important to Mr. Larson has been an advocate of it, and so has Ms. Sutton. So believe me, if they could be here, they would be here. And it's one thing about being from Hawaii is that I don't get to go home. So it's just a matter of whether the sidewalks are not so slippery that I don't take a spill. I'll be here. Having said that, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you for having this great hearing. I'd like to ask for your unanimous consent to have Mr. Larson's opening statement put into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And with that, I think we're ready to begin.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. One thing, a little housekeeping. I need to introduce the summaries from the roundtables we held in New Jersey, California, and Hawaii, and without objection, the summary memos will be included in the record. One thing I didn't mention is, Mr. Larson and I have been doing this now for several months, and it seems to me that we were stood up for about 6 months, and that we're coming close to the end and come out with some concrete recommendations to put in the next defense authorization bill. But it seems to me this is probably going to be a longer term process because there are some big problems that I think we face getting those ideas and those new technologies to the DoD. So it's my hope that after we come forth some concrete ideas on legislation, we'll continue this. I look back over the history, and it took about 4 years for Goldwater Nichols to finally pound it into the Department of Defense's head that they needed to operate jointly. So I think this is another situation. This is not going to be 6 months or one piece of legislation. This is going to be over a period of time, convincing folks who have been doing business for a long, long time the same way that they need to look at things differently. So with that, We'll hear testimony from our panelists. First, Dr. Cross, please.
Chairman Schuster and panel members, thank you first for the opportunity to testify today. My name for the record is Stephen E. Cross. I'm a proud veteran, and I currently serve, as was noted, as Executive Vice President for Research of the Georgia Institute of Technology, or commonly called Georgia Tech. Over the past 25 years, I've been involved in defense research and technology transition activities through leadership positions in Department of Defense laboratories, DARPA, through the directorship of a federally funded research and development center at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called the Software Engineering Institute, and through my current position. I've also led many advisory boards related to your topic today. And besides my academic appointment at Georgia Tech, I'm proud to also serve as a member of the Defense Science Board. Georgia Tech includes the largest engineering school in the country, and it's ranked in the top 10 of technological universities in the world. Has an enviable track record of economic development success. And I think this is attributable to both a culture and a unique integration of leading-edge research and technology transition and economic development. So in addition to the world-class faculty and graduate students, it includes what's called the Georgia Tech Research Institute, which is 1,500 people devoted to applied research and subject matter experts that work on many defense problems, as well as a State of Georgia-supported economic development arm that includes 225 specialists. So we also have unique infrastructure and a culture where we work on classified problems right on the main campus. We pride ourselves on our agility and our ability to do research that anticipates future needs. So we'll probably explore this more in the testimony today, but the challenges that we face today are, if we look at military history, are not completely unprecedented. What is changing more than anything today is the rate of change. It used to be that we could rely on time to respond. I remember when I was still on active duty in Operation Desert Storm, we had 5 months to respond until the Iraqis came into Kuwait. We just don't have that luxury anymore, especially with cyber attack, for instance. We also used to be able to rely on our geography, but we can't do that anymore. And we used to rely on just technologies that would come out of our laboratories in the United States. But the globalization of research means that we need to be aware of what's being done across the globe. So not surprisingly, and of course I strongly urge continued support for defense-related research, but I also applaud this panel's looking into improvements that can be made in the entire defense enterprise, both cultural and in business practices, so that we can actually ensure that our forces can continue to meet the future threat, have an unfair competitive advantage on the battlefield, and continually embrace practices of innovation. So I look forward to doing my best to answer your questions here today. If I fumble or if I don't completely ask a question, I'd be very happy to, at any other time, answer any questions or support your staff in any way I can. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cross. And with that, Dr. Winarski.
Chairman Schuster and members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to submit written testimony to you about independent nonprofit research and development organizations. I'm Norman Winarski. I'm Vice President of Ventures for SRI International, a nonprofit research and development organization with facilities in Menlo Park and locations around the United States internationally, including Princeton, New Jersey, State College, Pennsylvania, and Tokyo, Japan, to name a few. SRI International was founded as Stanford Research Institute in 1946 and performs sponsored research and development for governments, businesses, and foundations. We're known worldwide for world-changing innovations in computing, health, and pharmaceuticals, and chemistry, materials, sensing, energy, education, national defense, and more. We bring our innovations from the laboratory to the marketplace through technology licensing, products, and spin-off ventures. Our innovations have created entirely new industries, billions of dollars in marketplace value, and lasting contributions to society. SRI invented the mouse. It helped advance the Internet. It invented HDTV. And those yellow lines that you see in the ball games, that was augmented reality that was invented at SRI, Princeton. SRI's most important contributions relate to innovation itself. We teach innovation best practices, which we call the discipline of innovation. We've started more than 40 spin-off companies to leverage our technology in new commercial applications, with total market value of those companies exceeding $20 billion. One recent example, SRI's artificial intelligence project for DARPA, called CALO, led to the technology underpinning of Siri, the virtual personal assistant in Apple's new iPhone. My role in Siri was co-founder and board member. However, I'm not here to talk about my organization. Instead, I'd like to inform the members of this panel about the important role nonprofit research institutes play in keeping our armed services strong and ready. Let me begin by thanking the members of this panel and the full committee for including in its report accompanying the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act the requirement that the Department of Defense brief the members of the Armed Services Committee on DoD policy relating to nonprofits. Nonprofits perform basic and applied research as well as development and limited production in a large number of areas. Since we're neither universities nor for-profit corporations, we are sometimes overlooked when procurement policies are established. In fact, we're often treated as if we're for-profits. Because we're chartered pursuant to 501c3, nonprofits possess unique advantages over other organizations. For one, we have no shareholders. That means we can focus on the warfighter with the best possible solution, less concerned about bottom line. We're also impartial. Nonprofit research and development organizations are not affiliated with any government agency or corporate entity, nor do we endorse products or services. And DoD's reluctance to use the Competition and Contracting Act exception that allows non-competitive procedures to establish or maintain an essential engineering research and development capability is in contrary to the intent of Congress. It is clear from the plain language of the statute that Congress authorized sole source awards to nonprofits because it recognized that we, like universities, FFRDCs, and government labs, exist to provide a public service. We would very much like to see this opportunity for nonprofits as well. The nonprofit community would also like to have the opportunity to participate in programs like the UARCs, the University-Affiliated Research Centers, for which we're currently excluded. If nonprofits were given the opportunity to be designated as UARCs, then we would be able to much better support the STEM capabilities. Many of our organizations already provide internships, for example, to graduate students. On behalf of the independent nonprofit research and development community, we appreciate the role Congress is playing in facilitating a discussion between all sectors. And as to how to best serve the warfighters and the American taxpayer, we look forward to reading your report and working with you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, Dr. Huffman.
Chairman Schuster, honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before your panel. My name is Stephen Huffman. I'm the Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of the MITRE Corporation. Our company's 53 years of experience, contributions, and accomplishments have given us a perspective that I believe is highly relevant to today's topic of getting innovative solutions from concept to the hands of the warfighters. To maintain superior military capability in a declining budget environment, the DoD must explore creative ways of rapidly deploying new capabilities in an affordable manner. Achieving this objective will require the best innovative thinking of the DoD, government and private laboratories and research institutions, and suppliers in the defense industrial base. As a part of this effort, federally funded research and development centers, or FFRDCs, are well positioned to contribute to transitioning innovative technologies from concept to fielded capability. The MITRE Corporation is a not-for-profit organization chartered to work only in the national interest. MITRE manages FFRDCs and applies its expertise in systems engineering, information technology, operational concepts, and enterprise modernization to address our sponsors' critical needs. An FFRDC is a unique organization that assists the U.S. government with scientific research and analysis, development and acquisition, and in systems engineering and integration. FFRDCs address problems of considerable complexity, analyze technical questions with a high degree of objectivity, and provide creative and cost-effective solutions to government problems. To ensure the highest levels of objectivity, FFRDCs are organized as independent entities with limitations and restrictions on their activities. This unique standing provides special access to government information and provides a long-term perspective. Since FFRDCs are prohibited from manufacturing products, competing with industry, or working for commercial companies, both industry and government confidently provide them with sensitive information. FFRDCs operate as long-term partners with their sponsoring government agencies and achieve a deep understanding of their sponsors' evolving roles, issues, and challenges. MITRE has supported numerous rapid capability development programs that address urgent operational needs. In our experience, there are three keys to success. Number one is to work closely with the operational users to understand their needs. The second is to adapt mature technology and build operational prototypes to prove the concept and get user feedback. And the third key is to acquire operational capability through an agile acquisition strategy. Operational users have the best understanding of the capabilities they need. However, they rarely have the in-depth technical knowledge necessary to conceive a solution. FFRDCs are well equipped to bring technical knowledge to the end users and work closely with them to solve their problems. Whenever possible, MITRE deploys staff to the field to study firsthand the special challenges our end users, including warfighters, face. Agile acquisition is a strategy for providing multiple rapid deliveries of incremental capability to the user for operational use and evaluation. The incremental deliveries can be made every few weeks or every few months, and each iteration will be built with continuous user participation and feedback. The advantages of this strategy are that, first, that development can begin immediately without the time and expense needed for the development, refinement, and approval of functional requirements. And secondly, significant user involvement during the development process guarantees that the capabilities delivered will meet the user's needs. An example of the successful application of an acquisition strategy is the Battlefield Airborne Communications Node, or BACN, an innovative solution that uses commercially available components to provide communications gateways airborne where the warfighters need them most. MITRE serves as the lead systems engineer on the BACN program for the Airborne Networking Division at the Air Force's Electronic Systems Center. These airborne gateways significantly shorten command and control response times by enabling machine-to-machine transactions, data link translations, and voice bridging. By the end of 2010, the BACN team had deployed 5 aircraft carrying the new operational nodes into theater. In addition to directly supporting government capability development and conducting their own research, FFRDCs play an important role in interacting with other sources of innovation and channeling them towards government needs. FFRDCs often serve as brokers for interaction between government and industry on technical issues. For example, in the not-too-distant future, soldiers will routinely use smartphones with situation-specific mobile applications. It's not difficult to imagine the existence of a robust industrial ecosystem supplying the DoD with various mobile applications through the DoD's own App Store. To bring that moment closer, MITRE created the Government Mobile Applications Group, which includes participations from commercial companies such as Apple and Google and a number of government agencies. Dozens of representatives from government industry meet quarterly to discuss the DoD's special needs, for example, for extra security, and how to lower barriers to quickly fielding products. FFRDCs also interact with industry to transfer the practical results of FFRDC work to the commercial sector through such methods as cooperative research and development agreements, technology licensing, open source participation, and contributions to industry standards. The current physical environment requires significant reduction in DoD spending without jeopardizing national security. I believe that with the best innovative thinking of the DoD, government and private research institutions, and suppliers in the defense industrial base, the DoD can maintain its superior operational capabilities even in an austere fiscal environment. Federally funded research and development centers play a unique role in addressing this challenge, working with government, academia, and industry to transition innovative technologies from concept to fielded capability. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to address this panel. I request that my prepared statement be included in the record, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I want to start off, Dr. Lenarski, you mentioned that sometimes the nonprofits are treated like for-profits. What does that look like? I mean,
well, relative to, for example, the opportunity to participate in the UARCs, which are university participation, the nonprofits have not been permitted, or other types of RFPs or BAAs that correspond to university or FFRDCs just don't mention nonprofits. Right. This would be very helpful if the nonprofits could be thought of as a major force that can help and accelerate bringing products to the warfighter.
Most universities I know, Penn State in particular,
Yeah.
claim they're not for profit.
They are nonprofit.
Well, some would question
Right.
with that, but you operate very similarly.
We do.
What they do at
The difference is universities have an educational goal, advancing knowledge in the world.
Right.
We also have an invention goal. We're not educators, and that's partly why this happens, but we have a goal of making an impact on this world. We're a nonprofit with a mission for the health and peace and prosperity of mankind.
Right. And are you working you work closely with the universities?
We do. We were originally, as you know, spun out of Stanford University, and in fact, for example, the KALO program that I mentioned about that led to the creation of SIRI, we were prime with DARPA. We had 23 subs, including Stanford, Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, and the who's who of the AI world.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, we've heard over and over throughout our roundtables and our hearings about the Valley of Death.
Right.
And how do we bridge that from research to acquisition programs? And just wanted each of you could take a few minutes to talk about your recommendations on improving that process. How do you see it? What's your experience been?
Sure. Well, let me make a brief comment about the Valley.
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry.
Makes it a little
Yes,
easier for
Mr.
us.
Chairman, it is now. Just showing that I'm trainable. That's good. The Valley of Death is a problem usually when we think about technology transition as a linear process of going from the research laboratory to some kind of demonstration until full-scale development or use in a commercial application. But it's not a linear process at all. Some people describe it as sausage making. It's really a messy process with a lot of give and take and back and forth. One of the things that I've found to be most useful is to have infrastructure in terms of laboratory or facilities where all the parties can come together and people can have wide bandwidth communication. Let me give an example. When I was a DARPA program manager, before Operation Desert Storm, our command and control systems, and I worked quite closely with both MITRE and SRI on this. They were both supported by my programs. We really couldn't respond to the kind of deployment that we saw from Europe to Saudi Arabia that was going to have to take place very quickly. And what we were able to do is all come together in a command center at Scott Air Force Base and have the developers work with the warfighters, work with the trainers, work with the testers, work with everybody across the DoD spectrum, and we worked pretty much night and day to build a system. So we had high bandwidth communication. We're all working together on the same infrastructure. There wasn't any confusion. There's clarity on what the goals for the project were, and we were all motivated to solve that problem. So that's one of the reasons the Valley of Death happens. Another reason it happens in our own work at Georgia Tech, and I suspect in other research universities as well, is where we're trying to go into the commercial market with intellectual property that we have created, often through defense or other federal sources of funds. And there's just a gap in terms of the venture capital funding that's available, or the cadre of CEOs that could help create these spin-out companies. I could explore later, if you wish, some of the things we've tried to do to address that, and I know that other universities are doing the same. But those are a few examples.
Wonderful question. The Valley of Death is real. Going from invention to implementation is often where ideas fall. SRI specializes in crossing the Valley of Death. That's one way that we as a nonprofit actually differ. One of the things, in terms of what could be done about it, first of all, focusing on the customer need is crucial. Even in 6.1, 6.2, when you're doing fundamental research at SRI, everyone focuses on who is the customer and what is their need. That's in antithesis to focusing on the technology and how can we advance it. It's not quite antithesis in the sense that it's opposition, but in fact, you have to do both. You have to constantly look at market need. So in the case of SIRI, for example, with KALO, the cognitive assistant learns and organizes this huge DARPA program, $150 million. There was always the advancement of AI technology, learning in the wild in a way that people had never done before, artificial intelligence for all small devices and large. But understanding the use and who might have it, who might use it, was what led to the creation of a venture, Siri, and led to the continued success there that would then, as we've heard, almost certainly assist the warfighter as well. So I'd say, first of all, focus on customer need. Second, as your experience with your own businesses, focus on the market and the revenue opportunities that you might create that could sell to the warfighter so that this might be possible. Teach the language of innovation. Very few people actually understand what's a value proposition, what's value. And SRI does that, in fact. And realize that we should be able to cross the valley of death, not all the time, but many times with a rigorous innovation process. So that sounds a little funny, because it can be innovation can be the work of a mad genius overcoming all obstacles, but it can also be the work of a genius team, facilitated, not overcoming, but actually supported in reaching its market.
Dr. Huffman? Yeah. Yes, I think one of the key things in overcoming the valley of death is really to recognize that research and development of advanced technology is inherently risky. So those who are doing research are more likely to take risk of failure in the research. Those charged with delivering fielded capability have the charge to eliminate risk from their activities. They want a certain outcome so that they can guarantee that a capability will be delivered to the warfighter at a time certain. So those two things are inherently in conflict, taking additional risk with research on the one hand and trying to get the risk out of your acquisition program so you can ensure capability. Again, I think a key is to get the end users more closely engaged with the development of the technology and capability, so they can see interim steps along the way and be able to provide incremental feedback to the developers. Some of the most success we've had is, as Dr. Cross said, when we got all the developers, the users in the same infrastructure and very closely operating together so that they could basically try out interim products, give immediate feedback to the developers, then modify what they were doing. And that has proven successful on a number of occasions.
Well, thank you very much. And that's one of the things I think we've heard from the for-profits is they're unable or not allowed to talk to the end user going through some of these processes. It makes it extremely difficult, which makes absolutely no sense to me. If what you three have said is you got to be in the room with all hands on deck, everybody trying to figure out how to best put this product, this technology forward. So with that, yield to Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Arnarski, in reading your prepared statement, of course, I'm not sure how many people can claim 9 Emmys and 1 Academy Award plus a DARPA award. But having said that, certain parts of your statement have got me somewhat confused. You state that nonprofits like yourself excel at transitioning products from the laboratory to the assembly line, yet in the prior page, you said that because nonprofits are treated differently from the FFRDC that Mr. Hoffman speaks to and universities, and they're not able to receive sole source contracts, that you really cannot take that product and develop and sell it commercially. So I'm trying to figure out from your two statements exactly what it is that when you talk about dealing with the Defense Department, which we're curious about, what is it that SRI does and what has been the prohibitive parts of your structure or the way we do procurement that just makes it prohibitive for you to do it?
Yeah, sorry if there was any confusion. We are able to, as a nonprofit, develop technology and deliver it to the warfighter. Just because we're a nonprofit doesn't mean we're not able to overcome these obstacles. So we can, in fact, overcome them, and we've demonstrated that many times. Can
you give an example, for example? What exactly comes to mind as something that you've been able to do as SRI?
So today in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's a system called TerraSite that SRI developed that enables you to view outside the bases and see everything that's going on. There are other flying systems that we can't go into depth on that can determine or find IEDs, for example. So many, many technologies have left SRI and gone to help the warfighter, including the invention of the mouse, going back to that day. So it's not like it's not possible. It's just much more difficult to take the process and work with the warfighter in a way that universities and other FFRDCs and other organizations are capable of doing. So this would, rather than prevent, that wasn't meant to be my indication. By virtue of giving this capability to us, we will be able to accelerate and be even more productive and more efficient.
So the capability that you're asking for is UARC, or is it
is
in
one
procurement?
very specific concrete example? Yes. And the other example is that the DoD would consider us for sole source because we are nonprofits when there is sponsored research in other occasions.
So why are you, do you know why, if you do know, you're not treated as a sole source like everyone else, and that you must compete with manufacturers, which is, I think, what your statement was here?
The competition is with everyone, manufacturers, universities, and the like. I don't know why my best guess in terms of our discussions about this is that we're a small group relative to the others, and that basically overlooked often in terms of these procurements.
Is there a problem with the commercial application of whatever you may create when dealing with the DoD? We've heard a lot of that you know, there's an issue about the creation and then what you do after that and the commercial application of it.
Do you mean the Valley of Death again?
Right.
Yeah. So there's always a problem with the Valley of Death. Invention is often by researchers, for example, and they're looking at technology to advance the technology, but in fact, unless it's really 6.4 and beyond, it's very difficult for manufacturers, primes, to say, this is what we want, and you know, it hasn't been constructed for them. It's been constructed in a parallel path. So whether the manufacturers that make these products want that is very difficult and takes a great deal of collaboration with the manufacturers, too.
Thank you. Dr. Hoffman, in your description of what you do, and the ability to go in, for example, when you said you put them on the ships and then you know, they get to really interact with what's going on, let me understand, you sort of an entity that you're not doing the actual research and development. You seem to be doing more the T&E, the testing and the evaluation of what is then brought to the warfighter. Am I correct in that understanding?
Well, actually, all of the above. We are systems engineering FFRDC, so we're not into pure research. We do our own research and development to explore new concepts and develop proof of principle, proof of concept prototypes. We work very closely with the government in acquiring operational capabilities so that we help translate their needs into the requirements that industry can then provide solutions for and help the government be basically an informed consumer. I like to use the analogy of a building architect as the type of service we provide to the government. The architect works for the client, has no vested interest in who's going to build the building, and really make sure that the client's needs are met, that they can do trade-offs of the capability that they'll be acquiring versus the constraints they have in terms of cost, schedule, and things like that. So that's basically how we really work from the early concept all the way through to the test and evaluation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. With that, Colonel West is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Hanabusa as well. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And as I shared, Dr. Cross, you know, my time selling Cokes at Georgia Tech was a great opportunity for me to learn some responsibility and, of course, get a chili cheese dog at the varsity. When I look, my alma mater is actually University of Tennessee, and the University of Tennessee has a Defense Business Institute that is there. And so as I'm sitting here and I look at the title here, Getting Innovative Solutions from Concept to the Hands of Warfighter, I'd like to throw this idea out here and see what you all think about this. You know, if there's some kind of way that we could develop, you know, regional research and development partnerships between, you know, our colleges and universities with, you know, the military. I'll give you a great example. Georgia Tech is not that far from Fort Benning. Fort Benning is now the Maneuver Warfare Center for the United States Army. All infantry and armor is coming out of there. Or we look at the Research Triangle where Duke and the University of North Carolina is. Right down the road, you have United States Special Operations, the Army Special Operations Command and the airborne forces there at Fort Bragg. Is this a way that we can maybe streamline so we don't have these valleys of the death and things like this, where we can develop these type of partnerships with our colleges and universities, with these installations that are close by, being naval installations, Air Force, or whatever, as we look across the country, so that we can start looking at, if there's something that I'm dealing with at Fort Benning, I want to see, how can we take this concept and bring it to fruition. I can drive up the road to Georgia Tech, and the students at Georgia Tech or whatever can immediately come right down to Columbus, and that cuts down, the travel time and everything. So is that a viable solution to help us go from concept into the hands of the warfighter?
Congressman, it is, and if I could give a couple examples of what we're doing in Georgia along those lines. Specifically with Fort Benning, the State of Georgia supports both the infrastructure of Georgia Tech and our economic development outreach. So we have 27 locations throughout the State of Georgia, including a location in Columbus, Georgia. And one of the things that's going on right now with the National Guard in Georgia, Fort Benning's increasing emphasis, as you mentioned, the maneuver function that came from Fort Knox with unmanned vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles. And if we go over to Warner Robins Air Force Base, they're the sustainers now for the Global Hawk and the Predator, so unmanned air vehicles. And if we go over to King Bay, just south of Savannah, there's a lot of emphasis in the Navy with undersea autonomous vehicles or intelligent torpedoes. Much of that great work is done at the UARC at Penn State. So what we've done in the State of Georgia is we've set up a coalition, if you will, that involves the National Guard, the state government, the military operations in the state, and the research universities, Georgia Tech, but other research universities, to look at how do we bring, in a use-inspired research way, what are the open research issues that a research university can look at, and how can we accelerate those research results into practice through that entire ecosystem, if you will. There's another existence proof of where that works really well. If we go to, it's Robins Air Force Base, I'm sorry, in the Warner Robins Air Logistics Center, where the electronic warfare systems for the Air Force are maintained, and much of that research is done out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And what we've developed at Georgia Tech is a great deal of forward-looking research in electromagnetics and electronic warfare, but also through our applied research function, the Georgia Tech Research Institute, the institutional memory for electronic warfare systems in the Department of Defense. And we can upgrade those systems very quickly and then produce production plans that companies can take forward and produce. And we have many examples where we've done that as well. So creating these partnerships is very much key for addressing the Valley of Death and working closely with the warfighters, and it's spot on.
Great question, Congressman West. I would say absolutely it would be highly valuable. I mean, SRI basically believes that innovation comes from learning from the customer, so customer need, building a differentiated technology approach, understanding the benefits to the customer, and understanding the competitive approaches to doing all those things. If we have those four ingredients, then we can create great value for the customer. And in the case of what you just described, that would far better improve our ability to have those ingredients. We'd understand the warfighter's needs. They'd be right with the technologists. Otherwise, you get to you have the separation. Oh, I'm going to advance what I'm doing, but I'm not quite sure what it's good for. It's a little like, tech transfer without what you suggested is a little like driving in a car where technology is behind you and business is in front of you, and you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. So what we need to do is more of what you suggested.
Well, I definitely agree. I think Dr. Cross mentioned one of my favorite terms, use-inspired research, which is having a purpose to why you're doing research. In my role, I interact very frequently with our academic partners And one of the things that they are really asking me for is help us understand what the real needs are. They want to work on things that ultimately they can see someone benefiting from in the future. So they are highly motivated to have that, but they just don't know how to connect, to have a good avenue, and that's one of the roles that we try to play. I think one of the other things that can help with such a mechanism as you might suggest, one of the other things they lacked often is connection to sources of data or information with which to test out their ideas. I can make anything work in a laboratory environment almost, but when you get out in the real world, things get messy, and they need to be able to acquire information and data to test their concepts. And very often there are barriers for universities to be able to access that kind of information and data.
I think that what you just talked about was an unmanned vehicle center of excellence. And if we could kind of have that type of synergy, I think it will go a long way. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for your testimony today. Dr. Winiarski and Dr. Huffman, you're kind of talking about the exchange of ideas, the need for them or a new idea. Dr. Winiarski, in that realm, give me an idea of percentage numbers of their original ideas or you're furthering a current technology.
SRI has about 2,000 projects a year. We're continuing with all of those projects to serve the government requests. Sorry, not all, about 70% of those. The rest are commercial. We create 2 or 3 ventures a year, but only because that's what the ventures we create, we expect to or have to be potentially billion-dollar companies in order to get Silicon Valley to invest in it. But then in terms of transitioning to the warfighter, I'm sure there's maybe 50 or so, that maybe more, that transition and make great success for the warfighter.
And talking about, and I'll have all of you eventually weigh in on this, but when you talk about the federally funded research, and obviously we know the budget crisis we're in, and I know all of us sitting on HASC, we deal with it on a daily basis because we're going to lose our next generation of colonels and all that kind of stuff when you have these drastic cuts. So can each of you kind of talk on whether we're, where we're talking education, we're talking STEM and all that stuff, how that's going to affect us, our ability to move forward and that fine line that we have to walk. Dr. Huffman?
Certainly, I think the STEM education problem is not just a problem for DoD, it's a problem for our nation as a whole. I think the number of engineering graduates, continues to fall off. It used to be that we lived for many decades on the intellectual capital provided by citizens of other nations who immigrated to the United States, were educated, and stayed here because this was where you could pursue a career in high technology and engineering. That is no longer the case. We have competitors in other countries who now welcome those people back to work in their industries. They are developing their own universities, not quite yet maybe to a level in ours on average, but continuing to improve. That's great for the world in general, but for us as a nation and our competitiveness economically, I think science, technology, engineering, mathematics is critical for our future.
Dr. Winiarski?
I agree completely. We have a terrific shortage of people in all of these areas. They're crucial for innovation, which is going to be the way that we create wealth and health and success for this country. I'd say that we are also seeing innovations in education itself that can help. Education is being transformed in e-textbooks. It's being there's a course at Stanford right now, by the way, that's offered to 60,000 students simultaneously, one course. So there's ways to teach a nation even and open this up to the world in ways that we never had before. So, but in terms of the crucial nature of bringing more students in the science, technology, education, and mathematics area, absolutely essential.
Dr. Cross?
I agree completely. Mr. Congressman, it's just personally, I was interested in becoming an engineer in the early 1960s in 3rd grade when President Kennedy announced the moonshot. And, I wanted to be part of that. That was exciting. That drove a whole generation of people going into science and technology. We spent a lot of our volunteer time at Georgia Tech, and I know this is done at other nonprofits and research universities too, going out into the public school system and trying to get kids interested in science and technology. One of the ways we've been able to do that quite effectively across the country is through robotics and supporting robotics clubs in schools. And kids get really, really excited about this. So showing them that there's actually a path and a future in science and technology is very critical. As was mentioned, at a research university like Georgia Tech, our product are the students. And one of the concerns I have about the future of S&T funding from the DoD is what would be really irreversible in terms of production of PhD students that stay in this country and work. It takes about 10 years now to train a PhD student, about 6 years for the education. Increasingly in engineering, postdoctoral assignments are required. It's common in the sciences. That's 2 to 4 years. So from the time you start your graduate studies until you're actually hired as an assistant professor in an American university or a nonprofit or an FFRDC, you're looking at 10 years. And the cuts in funding will cut down the number of such students we can have. So we really have two problems. One is getting kids interested in the first place, and then the second one is the irreversibility if we cut out that pipeline.
And I brought that point up really to talk about, because we always talk about hollowing out our force from a military operations aspect. We're hollowing out our support force in the same manner, and it's really something, because if there's no need for it,
Right.
like you said,
Right.
if there's a need for it, there's interest in it, and people are going to gravitate towards it, and
Right.
we have to be careful with that. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to yield another 5 minutes to Ms. Hanabusa. We outnumber her over here, only in numbers, not in brain power.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Cross, I don't want you to feel left out. You made a statement about what we needed to do was the ability to do research for future needs of the military.
Right.
And I'm just curious, because this has been an issue for me, is what is the military going to look like in another 20 years, 30 years, and how do we define it? So when you say to address the future needs, and we know research begins and it takes a long time before we get the final product. I think the example we have is like F-22, 17 years in the making or something along those lines.
Right.
So can you tell me, in your mind, when you made that statement, who do you feel defines the future needs?
Well, it should be defined, and
And don't say us, because
it should be defined by the user, Congresswoman. The warfighter should be the ultimate source. And if we use this valley of death metaphor and visualization of it, we should be on the far side of the valley of death, looking and trying to understand what the users are going to need. There's examples from military history. One I like to cite is at Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama, back in the 1930s. It was before there's an Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps. And they knew that in future combat that daytime high-altitude bombing was going to be required. So the military was training, and they were testing systems there before we had engines that were powerful enough to lift an aircraft to 25, 30,000 feet. Okay, so that's an example of a venue for innovation where the warfighters and everybody connected to that was working together, and that was driving the technology requirements where there was missing technology, and that drove the research. At Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, when they first built an aircraft with engines that still weren't powerful enough, they built the runway up a hill so the airplane could get enough velocity coming down the hill just to get it up into the air and test these systems. So I'm not saying we should do things at that high risk, but these venues that are created to brainstorm, skunk works would be another term for that, to look and brainstorm about the future. So.
We went to Skunk Works.
Okay.
but the other thing, and Dr. Cross, the other thing I throw into this is the fact that almost every single person who has spoken to us, and the most recent was, I believe, General Chiarelli. He said the one thing that you can count on is the fact that what we have been 100% perfect on is that we have been 100% wrong in predicting what the war is going to look like. So, for example, we're beginning Afghanistan and Iraq with World War II technology. And so I guess that's the concern. Right. We know what we needed in Afghanistan and Iraq, but is that what the warfighter is going to need in the future? Because we may not be in that arena. So how do we define it. And you made also a statement that the U.S. needs to be aware of developing technologies worldwide.
Right.
Are you aware of anything in government or someone, or is your entity, for example, actually studying what's going on worldwide in terms of defense type of technology?
Well, in terms of technologies for materials, electronics, absolutely. We, for 22 years, have had I didn't put this in my written testimony, but it's on our websites. We've had a campus in Europe, in France. We have partnerships in China, in Singapore, in Ireland, and Panama. Researchers today, regardless of any of the organizations they're in, this is a global pursuit. And your colleagues doing research are going to be at the best universities, the best research organizations worldwide. So to have credibility, you're going to be interacting with them, and that's very important. So absolutely, we're engaged in research on a worldwide basis.
And this is one that I'm going to ask every one of you to answer. One of the concerns everyone has, of course, is that as the defense budget begins to collapse, or we start to cut the defense budget, and normally one of the things that always gets hit first is research and development. That seems to be one of the categories that gets cut. If there were to be major cuts, how would that affect the number of actual professors or people employed at Georgia Tech?
Sure. Congresswoman, if I could respond, it's going to be linearly related to the cuts. So you could we're very competitive in terms of receiving defense research funding. It's about a third of our overall research portfolio. And for a proportional cut, there will be a proportional number of faculty and more importantly, graduate students. Faculty are not completely supported by research. Usually they're covered for 9 months by the tuition and by the state support in a public university or by whatever the budget is for a private university. But it's traditionally 3 months that they're trying to cover with research support. But the graduate students will be cut, and that'll be and to be honest, that's where the real innovation comes from. The younger people who are driven and willing to work 20 hours a day and 7 days a week.
How much of your budget is defense related?
It's approximately 1/3 of our research portfolio. Our research portfolio was $643 million last year. It's approximately $230 million in defense related research. That's not all basic research. That includes 6.2 and 6.3A as well.
Dr. Winerski?
Yes, so the question you want me to answer is, if given major cuts,
Right.
how would SRI respond?
Right.
My feeling is it would be worse than linear, and that's because SRI has and hires people here in Silicon Valley, in one of the most difficult places on the planet to recruit great engineering staff, given Google and Apple and Microsoft and everyone else around us. And should there be this decline, it has an effect on the staff that says, you know, this is harder and harder to do something that we want to do greater and greater. By the way, during a period of time that we've never seen greater market disruptions. Market disruptions are happening in mobile, bio, in cybersecurity, and everywhere else. So the impact will not only reduce the staff for working on R&D for the government, it'll encourage them to go elsewhere. So we would very much like not to see a reduction.
Dr. Hoffman?
Yes, I think certainly we would obviously be affected by significant decreases in proportion. I think we would expect that. I think also, as my colleague said, the desire of talented engineering professionals to come and work for an organization which primarily supports the government, and particularly the DoD, and declining defense budget will be very difficult. They will seek opportunities elsewhere in the commercial sector because they perceive that as more stable, more opportunities to move up, particularly if they're early in their careers. So I think that would probably be a bigger impact than the direct reduction in our work, would be the perception of the workforce that maybe this is not the career path for me.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Real quick question. As far as compensation between, I would assume scientists and researchers in the government make less than you folks pay versus what Google and Microsoft and high-tech, would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Significantly, do you pay significantly more than the government researcher or scientist would make versus significantly more than you, than
I
government would?
can't, I don't know the government pay scales, so I can't comment on that.
Can't be more than about 175,000.
We are in a competitive market for talent, and we work very hard to try to understand, what the market is paying that talent so that we can attract and retain those individuals. But primarily, an organization like ours, you find that a lot of the motivation of the staff is really about the missions we support, and they are closer to being, desiring government service than making huge amounts of money in a startup.
Go for all three of you, basically.
Mr. Chairman, your rankings there are accurate. I would just point out one of the things that all of our organizations do is public service is important, and we support people coming back into government service from our organizations with the Interpersonnel Act, the IPAs. And so this is one of the ways that the government is able to have the high caliber, relevant technical capabilities that it is able to have. But, it is capped too and pay for doing that.
Right.
One of the other ways we're able to retain staff, and again, in this most difficult environment, is when we do create a venture or a license, SRI rewards a share of the royalty or equity to the staff. So even though we don't have any ourselves as a nonprofit, when they help create and innovate, they're motivated by helping make that happen.
Okay, thank you. With that, Mr. Schilling.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome. Sorry I was late. I was helping my wife get 6 kids to the airport. So, pretty good excuse, I guess.
Yeah.
So let me, I guess what I'm trying to figure out here, so would you say basically what we're saying is to get rid of Death Valley or minimize it basically by taking the end user, the warfighter with the researcher, and get those folks basically together? Is that pretty much what we're saying?
No, that's one way. Yeah. So another way, that's a direct way. Here's the warfighter, here's the technology, let's get together. Another way is commercialization, and then the warfighter can buy it off the shelf, basically. The GPS is a good example of that, or Siri, or mobile phones, or any of those other technologies. We do both at SRI.
Okay, very good. And then, and I know this will probably range all over the place, but what's the average time from concept to the end product, from research?
It does range, Congressman, does range all over the place, but if I could just pick up on my colleague's comment about the commercial sector is incentivized to be fast and to get products into the marketplace. Plus, the investment they make in maturing the technology is much higher than we can typically make in the DoD, which now gives the DoD a competitive advantage of buying back commercial products at lower cost than they could possibly do over the long life cycles that the acquisition process kind of subjects everybody in the DoD to. Having said that, I have to point out that the DoD is much better than other government agencies, but it's still, so that's one answer to that. But industry, it's the speed of the market, how quickly can get it to the marketplace.
Very good. And then, Mr. Cross, you had mentioned in the testimony, and I think I just want to clarify this, Georgia Tech's research expenditures were $643 million.
That's correct.
Did you say about a third of that money goes to DoD?
That's correct, and I could get you the exact numbers, but about 40% of our, let's see, I have to do these numbers correctly now because I have to break them down. But it's approximately 1/3 that's based on defense sources. I would say about 10% of that is related to basic research. Quite a bit of it is applied 6.2, and then there's some development work that we have as subcontracts to defense contractors, for instance.
Okay, very good. And then, as you pointed out, we're in a time of budget crunching, I guess you might say. How do we ensure that we maintain the competitive edge when we cannot fully fund all the research that's needed? So
if you could, Congressman, if I could, and part of it is not being able to predict exactly what is needed, but having the capacity to produce options for the future is one of the things we need to think about doing. And if we look at the definitions of basic research and applied research that are used by the DoD, it's to create understanding and knowledge of phenomena and of opportunities. Okay, so that doesn't mean it has to be created inside the DoD. We need to do a much better job, I think, also working with our international colleagues in technology scouting. Okay, wherever those ideas come from, and this I think is it's a precept of innovation, casting the net wide, crowdsourcing, looking for ideas anywhere, and then being able to realize that those are good ideas and apply them in this use-inspired research methodology.
Okay, very good. Mr. Winarski, well, you know, I've got I just want to, I'm one of the new kids on the block, like these three guys, or two guys, actually.
He's big enough to make it.
Yeah, he's two of us. How are FFRDCs created, and then basically, maybe this could be for Mr. Huffman, and then how do we narrow down which projects that they research, I guess?
Okay. FFRDCs, there's a section of the Federal Acquisition Regulations that cover the creation of FFRDCs. They're basically to be employed whenever the government can't acquire the services either from in-house resources or from normal means, so there has to be a special reason to do it. Basically, an FFRDC is created by a government agency, when they have such needs. There's a very tight governance process, or definitely should be, in terms of the operation of FFRDC to ensure that the work performed by the FFRDC is meeting those special needs. In the case of the Department of Defense, Congress has chosen to limit the size of the FFRDCs that the DoD employs, and the DoD has a comprehensive management plan that governs how the work is selected and how the governance process works.
All right, very good. I yield back the 2 seconds of my time.
Thank you very much. Couple questions concerning who you mainly work with, do business with, the three of you. Are they basically dealing, or mainly dealing with the large primes, or do you go down from large primes all the way down to the mom and pop who's developing something in his garage? Who are you working with out there? Start
I'm going to go right down the line. We work with most of the DoD research organizations, DARPA, and the laboratories on their competitively selected awards. We have master agreements with most of the large defense companies. The Boeings, the Lockheed Martins. We'll work directly with them, both the transition technology and to be subcontractors on their projects. And we also, in the state of Georgia, try to work with small companies that either spin out of research universities or locate there and plug into the state infrastructure for that support. So we work with everybody, sir.
But the majority of your work is being done, well, obviously would be with the primes because they've got the majority of the work. But
well, the 6.3A, the development work, is done with the primes, where we'll be a subject matter expert on some aspect of the technology. With the DoD laboratory and research infrastructure, we work on grants and contracts that are competitively selected and awarded by those organizations, like a DARPA or an Air Force research laboratory.
About the same as Dr. Cross mentioned is what we do. I'd also add some of the companies we work with, we create. We incubate and make companies that we then spin off, and then they sell to the warfighter or to commercial.
how does a company come about? One person with an idea?
No, we have a rigorous process. Sounds, again, strange to have a rigorous process of innovation, but in fact, we do it to help the process. So we start with the market need. We create a commercialization board. That board reviews and incents by funding, helps recruit team members to the venture, helps define the value proposition, and so on, and then we move that along to create the venture. Usually venture capital work as well, investors.
Well, we work exclusively for the Federal Government in terms of who pays us. We interact with all of the above, certainly with the large prime contractors all the way down to very small organizations. We're primarily in the information technology business, so it may take a lot more wherewithal to build an F-35 than it does to develop a software application that can be employed by the DoD.
And how do you, and I guess you're working with the Federal Government exclusively, how do you make how does industry know what's available to work with you folks? Do you have a program of education, of marketing? I don't know what you'd call it, but
we have an array of services here. We have strategic partnerships through master agreements with many companies, and frankly, we leverage our alumni network quite a bit at Georgia Tech, too. We pride ourselves on people that have gone into the executive ranks of major companies. State of Georgia and their Department of Economic Development is on our campus, and they're very proactive in advertising to companies on our behalf. And most research universities, their reputation speaks for themselves as well, so that's very helpful. We also have some specialized contracts, and I'll just cite one that I did in my testimony. It's called the Military Sensing Information Analysis Center. This is a contract we won from the Defense Technology Information Center, DTIC, and it's the repository for defense sensor technology. It goes back to the 1950s. And so we're a dissemination service on behalf of the DoD for information in this area as well. And any industry in the United States can come in and use the services there. It's like an online library. So many different approaches.
We also have a diverse number of approaches, strategic partnerships, working closely with the DoD orgs, working and talking to our peers and friends and going to conferences, all of that.
Right. And do you play a role, if any, in technology transfer from the federal labs?
The one example I could give you is not a DoD laboratory, but it's Department of Energy laboratories. We're in a partnership with Oak Ridge National Laboratory and working very closely with them in high-performance computing. We have faculty in our College of Computing that are deployed there. But there are not many instances that I can point to elsewhere. I think most of the instances that I've heard about and seen from my own military time is where there's unique infrastructure or colleagues, but it's most of our efforts, like at SRI, are trying to take the intellectual property that we're allowed to own through the Bayh-Dole Act and accelerate it into commercialized activities.
Right. We may work on occasion with some of the DOE lab. Argonne might be an example of that, but it's to my knowledge, I don't know of many instances.
You are, okay. And you had mentioned, Mr. Winarski, about taking this technology and you need to do billion-dollar companies.
Right.
That's what you have to deal with. And I just wondered if any of you are familiar with the Army Venture Capital Fund?
I have heard of it, yeah.
Anybody
I've heard of it as well, but I don't have
no experience with it at all?
We had originally proposed to be responsible for that fund, but we lost that competition.
Okay. All right. I learned about it in, I don't know where we were, Hawaii or somewhere the last week or so. Okay. I have no further questions. I don't know if any other folks on the panel do. Yes, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you all get the opportunity to go over to the combat theaters of operation, maybe to get an opportunity to see, some of these tools that are being implemented in the theaters of Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, wherever?
I haven't personally done that, but we have a number of people who do that on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yes.
Same in SRI.
Okay.
It's ad hoc, but through these advisory boards run, like the Defense Science Board, their opportunity. But one of the things I want to commend the DoD for is a program that they run through DARPA, and I believe it's through the Institute for Defense Analysis, that recruits young scientists from all of our organizations to have that experience, to go out into the theater, to go out to the National Test Range, to learn what it's like to carry 120-pound packs, so we need to do more research on batteries, et cetera, et cetera. So those programs are extremely valuable for providing the young researchers the opportunity to understand what use-inspired research is all about.
And last question, what do you think are the two most critical or vital areas where, the not-for-profits and with your capability and capacity can help the Department of Defense and Research and Development? If you look across the different type of battlefield functions, where do you think the top two where you guys can really have the most impact?
Persistent surveillance is one. We can have a tremendous impact in deploying. And cybersecurity is another.
In our case, Congressman, it's going to be in many specific areas. Autonomous systems will be one for reasons for a previous answer to a question. Certainly cybersecurity for the future. And then I think the next generation of electronics and some of the materials that we're developing are going to be very important as well.
Robotics, by the way, is going to have a major impact as well.
Yeah, our areas, information technology and cybersecurity is one of the top areas that I think we're trying to make a contribution, as well as intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and communications, moving large volumes of information and turning it into information that the warfighters can use.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Well, thank you. Anybody else? Senator Sure, go ahead.
Dr. Winarski, Dr. Cross gave us an idea of how much of his research budget is DOD. Can you tell me how much of whatever, I know you're a nonprofit, but how much money comes in that's DOD related?
In terms of total government, it's about 70%. That includes, though, my guess is about 20% is NIH and NSF. So it's 40 to 50%, somewhere in that range probably with the DOD.
And can you tell us what that equates to in terms of money?
Total budget for SRI is about total revenue, rather, is about $600 million a year.
Thank you. And do you have any ideas about how many, you have 2,100 people, so do you know about how many of them are actually working on DOD-related matters? Or are they just all cross-trained that you can't say?
No, I'm trying to think. There's 5 divisions, and I'd say 3 out of the 5, but 1 is much larger. So I'd say somewhere around 70% are DOD.
Thank you. And we know, Mr. Hoffman, you are totally government. But can you give us an idea for MITRE, how much of your budget is, how much is your budget and how much you think might be affected? And also of the FFRDCs that you actually supervise, if I understand, or you oversee, how much that equates to in terms of money too?
Okay. Overall, the DoD provides about 60% of MITRE's revenue. We manage 5 FFRDCs, 1 for the Department of Defense, 1 co-sponsored by the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Veterans Affairs, 1 sponsored by the Federal Aviation Administration, 1 sponsored by the Department of Homeland Security, and 1 sponsored by the U.S. courts.
And how much does that equate to in terms of money?
Total about $1.35 billion annually.
And that's all of MITRE?
All of MITRE.
And 60% is DOD?
Yeah, roughly $950 million, I think, is DOD.
And of the FFRDC that you said is DOD,
Yes.
do you know how much money that is?
Yeah, approximately $980 million.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank all of you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time and help us try to understand this. And again, look forward, I know the staff maybe contact you with some further questions or clarification, so we appreciate any help you can give us. Thank you all very much, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you. Very good. It's good. Let's give my best to Tom and Marie if you see them.
I will. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Hearing you speak.
You're welcome. This is my pleasure.
Thank you so much.